Heath Slater, we now know what's going on with Heath Slater in Impact Wrestling. Heath Slater will make his in-ring debut for Impact Wrestling next Tuesday night on Access TV as Impact Wrestling presents another episode of Impact Wrestling on Access Television. They have announced that the four-time WWE Tag Team Champion, Heath Slater, who is now just going by the name of Heath in Impact Wrestling, will challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship against Moose on next week's Impact Wrestling episode. I will do my very, very best from the outset, I must say this. I will do my very, very best to keep referring to Heath Slater as Heath. Of course, he has been Heath Slater for something like 16 years in WWE, so forgive me if I do slip up on a couple of occasions here, but he's gone with just the name of Heath, not Heath Miller, just Heath. It feels a bit strange, doesn't it? Obviously, I know that they obviously have to keep the names or keep it as close as they can because that can help name recognition, etc., etc. I'm just never huge on the whole one name gimmick. Sometimes it can work, Asuka, etc. But just Heath. The problem is with Heath, in my opinion, is that for so long he's been called Heath Slater. So in your head, it's so automatic to say Slater after you say Heath. So I'm sure I will slip up a million times in this video, and I'm sure so many people will going forward. But we'll do our very best to just call him Heath. So this past week on Impact Wrestling, we had TNA World Heavyweight Champion Moose, the self-proclaimed TNA World Heavyweight Champion. He issued an open challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, which I was very excited about, because if you've watched any of the Impact Wrestling videos that I've done recently here on the channel, this is what I wanted. I wanted an open challenge style format for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. I wanted the specific stipulations on it to be, though, that you had to be a former TNA original, or you had to be a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion, or something along the lines of that, to challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. But that wasn't the case. It's a slight overkill considering that we've already got an open challenge on the show when it comes to the Impact World Championship. So to I'm going to have an open challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship too. I know maybe the idea is, whatever the the Impact World Championship can do, the TNA World Heavyweight Championship can do too, and it's just as important. It's a real world champion. I'm the real world champion if I'm Moose, that sort of thing. So I get that. It's just, what the open challenge is. It's kind of like the in-trend thing at the moment. It's TNT with AEW, and it's now 2 on Impact Wrestling. It's crazy. But I said I would have liked an open challenge format when it came to the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Just what I would have preferred is that there's a bit more stipulations. I think the whole good thing with this TNA World Heavyweight Championship storyline is there's not a lot of nostalgia that comes with it, and comes with that TNA World Heavyweight Championship. A lot of people harken back to the days of TNA and to the Stings, the Kurt Angles, Bully Ray, etc., the people that have held that championship. And I just think they could have really embraced the past when it came to that by having the stipulation being, I'm going to have an open challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship every week, but you have to be a former TNA original, you have to have held this TNA World Heavyweight Championship in the past. Something like that would have been really fun and a really unique segment from week to week, but that's not the way that they've decided to go yet. So Moose had this open challenge and said about for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, and this led to Heath coming out and claiming that the TNA Championship Committee had guaranteed Heath a title shot. So they're continuing this kind of, I don't want to say comedic, but it is slightly comedic route that they were doing as we headed into Slammiversary with Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer was openly mocking Moose for being the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, saying you're carrying around a championship that doesn't even make any sense, it doesn't exist. Talked about the TNA World Heavyweight Championship Committee and that the committee have granted him this, and we're going to have all this sort of stuff. They've spoken to the TNA officials, and kind of mocking up that Moose is crazy and he's an idiot because he's talking about a championship that is defunct, it doesn't even exist anymore, and all of that sort of stuff. And to be honest, I'd rather they didn't do that. Look, the championship doesn't technically mean anything, right? It's like the $1 Million Championship in WWE or the FTW Championship in AEW, that it's more symbolic as an actual rather than an actual championship, more of a hood ornament for the character as opposed to an actual championship which they're defending or actually means something or is active in the company. But that doesn't mean you should mock it just because you carry around that that championship doesn't mean that you should mock it and say that it's stupid, or in the storylines right that the person carrying it is an idiot. The reason they carry it is to extenuate the character. The whole point of Moose carrying around this TNA World Heavyweight Championship is to basically say that he is almost so deluded and so grandiose and so over the top and in his own mind that he's already a world champion. He doesn't have to contend for the actual world championship. He can just crown himself as the world champion. Now, I understand the way they've wrote this now is that they're mocking that and they're trying to pick holes in Moose's logic there, and that's fine. I just don't know if I'd go completely comedic and say, oh, the championship committee and all of that sort of stuff. I could take or leave that. I was fine with it with Slammiversary of Tommy Dreamer, but it just feels a bit rehashed. That's Heath's rationale and excuse for having a world championship, the TNA World Heavyweight Championship opportunity next week. I'd rather they just said, look, Heath comes out, says, I know that's not real and I know it doesn't mean anything, but if it means you get paid more as a free agent myself, I want to get paid the very most in Impact Wrestling, so I want to take what's round your waist because that makes me more money. Why don't they do that? Instead of just doing the whole comedic, the World Championship Committee and all this sort of stuff. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It can be so much better, and it can mean so much more. And I'd rather they'd done that, but they haven't. We'll have to wait and see what they do with that one. To the response of Moose did to Heath, saying, well, you're talking about a championship committee. There is no TNA World Championship Committee. So it doesn't even exist. The TNA World Heavyweight Championship Committee doesn't exist, which Heath then responded, well, then neither does the TNA Championship, and that accepted the challenge. Impact executive Scott D'Amore has now declared that if Heath wins the belt, he'll be granted a position on the roster. So they're doing the whole free agent gimmick still with Heath Slater. Heath, take a shot. Heath, since he debuted at Slammiversary, he's been doing this gimmick whereby he hasn't actually signed with Impact Wrestling. He's a free agent. He jumped the guardrail at Slammiversary, had a bit of a confrontation with Rohit Raju, and then had a brief reconciliation, reunited with Rhino backstage before he was thrown out of the building by Scott D'Amore. Said, well, you're not actually under contract with Impact Wrestling. Obviously, we've got to make sure everyone's tested here, social distancing, we can't have you back here, and he was thrown out. So they're continuing that Heath Slater hasn't signed with Impact Wrestling, when we know he has. He was part of the press release coming out of Slammiversary that Heath Slater has indeed signed with Impact Wrestling. Nobody's fooled. Nobody's actually watching that program going, oh my God, Heath's a free agent and he broke into a building with no fans and massive quarantine rules and all this sort of stuff. Come on. I don't know why. I don't get it. I don't get it because he did that gimmick in WWE. And my big thing that I've been a big proponent of when it comes to Impact Wrestling recently with signing these former WWE guys is that they're signing these guys and they're completely, a lot of the time, like repackaging them, letting them be who they really are, letting them talk, letting them work, not putting stupid gimmicks on them, just letting them be themselves and get over as themselves because they've got such a chip on their shoulder. They've got such a big thing to prove after this release by WWE, and in some cases the way they were treated by WWE, whether it's personally, creatively, or professionally, you just have to let them do what they can. You just go to them and say, look, go and do your thing, because they'll knock it out the park because they've got a chip on their shoulder. When it comes to Heath Slater, I don't understand the reason why he has to be doing a gimmick that he did in 2016. Now, if you recall, in 2016, that's when we had the WWE brand extension for the second time. Raw and SmackDown drafted their rosters, and Heath Slater was left out of being drafted to either roster. He was a free agent. So he appeared on Raw to beg for a position on the roster, and you had matches like the Jinder Mahal, who ended up on the roster. You had interactions, the famous interaction with Brock Lesnar, where the I Got Kids catchphrase came from. He got the how beaten out of him by Brock Lesnar during that time. And he also appeared on SmackDown during that time, begging for a job, was saying that you should sign me to SmackDown. That's where we saw Rhino return to SmackDown, and that's how actually the Rhino-Heath Slater relationship was formed on SmackDown during that period of time. But eventually he got signed to SmackDown, and they became SmackDown Tag Team Champions, him and Rhino, the inaugural SmackDown Tag Team Champions. But that whole I'm a free agent gimmick just feels very 2016. We know he's not a free agent. We know he signed to Impact Wrestling. This idea that he's invading the arena every time and he's just either hanging out or finding a way into the building, I just don't think it's necessary. I'm more interested in Heath Slater, Heath the person, the wrestler, his story, as opposed to him being a free agent, which I know isn't the case. We saw an example of Heath on Monday Night Raw a few weeks ago, prior to the horror show at Extreme Rules, when he did that promo with Drew McIntyre. We saw a glimpse of what Heath is really capable of. His promo with Drew McIntyre was one of the best promos of the year. At the time, I said it was the best promo of the year, and to be honest, I probably stand by that. I still think it's a promo that really emotionally got me, and got me emotionally invested in the Heath Slater character at that time than I've probably ever been. It showed a different side to him. It showed that he can be serious, he can talk serious, he can have a real, engaging, aggressive, real, reality-based promo, which is ultimately what draws the money and draws the eyeballs on the product. He looked physically great and looked in better shape than he has ever been, and he looks like that now still. And during that interaction with Drew McIntyre, I looked at him and went, whoever signs this guy is getting a proper talent here. This guy, maybe not in AEW, but certainly in an Impact Wrestling, which is why I'm glad he's ended up in Impact Wrestling. I looked at Heath and went, this guy can be a world champion. This guy can genuinely be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. And I still do believe that. I just think that coming in the door, he had so much momentum from the appearance on Raw with Drew McIntyre and that interaction with Drew McIntyre and how many people got talking because of that promo, because of that segment. I just think it's a bit of a waste. I think it's a bit of a waste to be doing this whole I'm a free agent thing. Why not build him up? Because the problem is, when you market someone as I'm a free agent, I need this job, and if I win next week, I'm going to get signed here, it positions him as Impact Wrestling doesn't want him. It positions him as like the executives, like Scott D'Amore and Don Callis, are looking at Heath and going, wow, he was in WWE for a while, but he was just the 3MB guy. He was just the social outcast guy. He was in the Nexus originally, but whatever. He was in the core. And then he just played air guitar for a load of years and lost most of the time on WWE television and talked about his kids. It gives you that impression as a casual fan. Why hasn't he signed with Impact Wrestling? Why wouldn't the executives go to Heath Slater? Look at him. He looks great. He can cut a promo. He's being serious. Why wouldn't Impact Wrestling want Heath Slater? That's what would come in my mind if I was a casual viewer. I'd be like, well, why is he a free agent? Why wouldn't you just give him a job? So, again, especially in a time in which you're offering lots of people jobs. You're having Eric Young return to the company. You're having the Motor City Machine Guns return to the company. EC3's back with the company. You've just signed Gallows and Anderson for big contracts. Deonna Purrazzo, she's just signed with Impact Wrestling too. Brian Myers is coming back in. At this time where you're signing so many people and so many people are either making their debuts or returning to the company, to market Heath Slater as a free agent, he wants to join Impact Wrestling, and if he wins next week, he will join Impact Wrestling. It just screams, well, we don't want him, because if we wanted him, we would sign him to a contract, right? It doesn't feel right. That storyline just doesn't feel right to me, and it kind of feels like a rehash of something that was done 4 years ago. And not to say that it's bad, but it suited Heath Slater's character in WWE then, because, he was bottom of the totem pole, right? Well, who would want to sign him on Raw and SmackDown? The idea being, in the draft, he was forgotten about. He wasn't signed to any brand because he was forgotten about because he was so low on the totem pole. That works for Heath Slater in WWE, but the free agent storyline for Heath in Impact Wrestling doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't work for me, and I don't think that's the best way to be positioning Heath coming in the door here. Now, will Heath Slater win next week? I really don't know. I think my instincts are saying no, because I don't understand, or I don't think that Moose would drop the TNA World Heavyweight Championship yet. I think he's got other things to do when it comes to the whole TNA World Heavyweight Championship storyline. I think he's got other things to do with that title, and I think they've got greater plans for that title in terms of how they will eventually write out of the television storylines going forward. I just don't think that Heath will win next week because of that. And because of the stipulation, if he wins, he'll be signed. If he doesn't, he won't be signed. Again, it makes you think, well, if he's not going to win next week and he's definitely then going to be a free agent, not only is he not wanted by Impact, then he's kind of been kicked to the curb a little bit by Impact too. It makes him feel, I don't want to say worthless, but in terms of the stock and the momentum coming in the door, it just doesn't, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that's the best way they can possibly be presenting Heath, and it doesn't feel like the best way that they can be booking Heath when it comes to his first few outings in Impact Wrestling. Coming through the door, not to say that I'm not saying that the audiences between WWE and Impact Wrestling are totally distinct, because they're not. I would suggest that probably every single person that's watching Impact Wrestling on Tuesday nights on Access Television knows exactly who Heath Slater is and exactly his history, where he's come from, all of that stuff. I don't think there's anyone watching Impact who saw Heath Slater show up and go, who's this guy? I've never seen him before. I only watch Impact Wrestling. That doesn't happen. But I do think that when you bring someone in for the first time, especially if they've been with another company and they haven't been booked the best in that company, which is the case with Heath, I just think they need to be booked strong coming through the door. They need to make you be felt like a big deal. And in fairness, that is kind of the case with Heath Slater here in Impact Wrestling. But I just don't know if I just don't think if him losing his first match to Moose, which I think will be the case, I don't think is the right thing to do. But I wouldn't have Moose drop the title either. So perhaps, I mean, maybe they have a screwy finish. That might be the way around it. But again, with that kind of thing, my initial response to booking yourself into a corner that you have to do a screwy finish is, why'd you book it in the first place? I hate when people do that. I hate when WWE does that. Hell in a Cell last year, Bray Wyatt and Seth Rollins, they booked themselves into a corner. It ended up in a rubbish finish because they had to protect both guys. Coming out of it, you almost weren't necessarily so angry at the finish. You're angry at, why would you put yourself in that position? Why would you book yourself into a corner like that? Do a bit of pre-planning. Use a bit of forward planning. And I hope that's not the case of Impact here. I don't think it is, because they tape a lot of television at once. So I would hope that they don't book themselves into the corner of anything like that. Again, I just don't think it's the best presentation of Heath that they can do. I think that they could do something better. I think they could make him feel more legitimate. I think they could present him in a better light and make him feel more important. Yes, it does make him feel important that his first match of the company, he's challenging for a title, regardless of if it's an active, proper championship or not. That's a good way to start him off. But I don't think he'll win. And again, I just don't like this free agent storyline. I think it's just something that they've done that's been done before, and just isn't needed. I just don't think it's needed when it comes to Heath in Impact Wrestling. So what would be the storyline going forward after that? Well, I guess the free agent storyline would have to continue. I'd rather it be done pretty quickly, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Once he is officially on the roster, what happens then with Heath? I think he does have a few tags with Rhino. Obviously, there's history there. They were former SmackDown Tag Team Champions. They've got good chemistry. Not only are they friends, obviously, inside the ring and well known together inside the ring, but they're also good friends outside the ring. They rode together with to every show. Heath has been very open about how influential Rhino was on his career and teaching him things and smartening him up with certain things, because Rhino's been there, done it all, hasn't he? He's been around in the pro wrestling business for a long time. So I do think that Slater and Rhino will team up for a bit. I hope that isn't just what only Slater does, though, in Impact Wrestling. I do think he's a lot capable of more. I really, really do. Again, I mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. In my opinion, Heath Slater can be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. And I've said this numerous times, and some people have agreed and some people have disagreed, which is fair enough. Of course, it's your opinion. That's what this channel is about. It's all about opinions. But I do think Heath can be a world champion in Impact Wrestling, as long as he's portraying the Heath Slater that we saw on Raw a couple of weeks ago. If that Heath Slater is presented, or that Heath is presented in Impact Wrestling, he can be a world champion. You can cut those promos. We know he can work. That kind of presentation is world champion material. I really do think there's more to him, and I think there's more that he's capable of in Impact Wrestling, and I think that's why it's the perfect place for him to go, was Impact Wrestling. I've said this about numerous of these WWE stars that left WWE or released by WWE back in April, is that my worry if they went to a likes of an AEW is that they would have a ceiling, whereas in Impact, I just think they'd have a better opportunity to shine and could potentially do more and raise their stock. And I think that's the case with Heath Slater. I think he can become a world champion in Impact Wrestling. I really do, as long as he's booked correctly and is booked seriously. which would kind of counteract, going back to the whole Rhino tag team, because it was a comedy tag team. Of course, there was serious elements of it. It was a serious nature at parts of it. Obviously, when they won the SmackDown Tag Team Championships, it was a big emotional moment. The crowd were into it, and that was serious. The whole "I'm doing this for my kids" thing was serious, but it was largely a comedic tag team. You had comedic segments, with the trailer that Heath Slater apparently lived in, and Rhino put in, was it spray cheese on crackers and sad faces and all that sort of stuff. It was a comedy tag team. And I don't think that's the best course for Heath right now in Impact Wrestling. We know he can do comedy. He did it for however many years in WWE, nearly 10 years on the main roster, 16 years overall from when he signed his developmental deal. He was signed to a developmental contract in 2004. So we know that Heath Slater can be a comedic character. We know he can do that. Now it's time for him to do something different. Now it's time for him not to do the whole free agent stick again. It's time for him to be Heath, show a different side to his character, a different layer to what he's capable of in professional wrestling. Not the comedic stuff, not the I've got kids, not necessarily the tag team with Rhino, even though I do think they'll team up for a while. I think if they were serious, they could be a fantastic addition to the tag team division, without a doubt. Impact tag team division is very, very strong. I would love to see them go up against the North and the Motor City Machine Guns. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But I don't want that to be the only thing that Heath does, easy for me to say, in Impact Wrestling. I think he's capable of doing more, and hopefully Impact books him to do more. Now, as far as the TNA World Heavyweight Championship goes, and we'll end on this here, the reason I think Moose will win next week when it comes to the Heath versus Moose match is because we're going to be getting Moose versus EC3 in the future. That's just a given. It's been teased for a while now, and we saw last week on Impact Wrestling, EC3 attacked Moose. So we're going to get Moose versus EC3 at some point, whether they save it for Bound for Glory or they do it on Impact Wrestling on Access Television, or maybe a special Twitch event. We'll have to wait and see when it comes to that. But this has been going on a while. Even as far back as Moose defeating Hernandez on Impact Wrestling for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship to retain the title, and at the end of it they had EC3's music played, and everyone was confused at the time because EC3 was still serving out his 90-day non-compete clause and all of this sort of stuff, but it was like everyone got excited because EC3 is coming back to Impact Wrestling. And then, of course, last week on Impact Wrestling, actually, I should backtrack. After that moment on Impact Wrestling where EC3's music played, you also had EC3 doing these Control Your Narrative promos on social media. Moose actually openly mocked one of these. He shot it in the exact same way that EC3 was doing it. I don't know if he specifically mentioned EC3 by name, but he actually showed a picture of EC3 and all of that sort of stuff, and EC3 has responded by calling Moose a false idol and a false prophet. I guess by that he means he's carrying around a world championship that he never truly earned. He just crowned himself as a world champion and calls himself the real world champion, and that's the whole thing with EC3, with this Control Your Narrative thing, is he's talking about tearing down false idols and false prophets. So Moose is the first person on his hit list. So after all of that, and after EC3 made his debut at the end of Slammiversary on July 18th, last week on Impact Wrestling, after Moose defeated Falabar for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship to retain it once again, we had EC3 show up with a towel on his head, because apparently you need to be unrecognizable in an empty room. I get it if there was, I said this at the time, I get it if there was like a crowd there and you want to hide yourself, but there's no crowd. Like, why have you got the towel on? Who are you disguising yourself from? And you're going to take it off anyway. So maybe he's just so focused, right? He's gone full Taz, or didn't Kane do it when he took off his mask because he was ashamed of his face? I don't think EC3 is ashamed of his face. Although Mick Foley said recently on Twitter that EC3 looks like Kurgan from The Oddities, which, to be honest, in terms of comparisons, it's not far off. So maybe that's why he's wearing a towel over. So if I look like Kurgan, and this is no offense to Kurgan, if you ever listen to this, which I doubt you will, but if you ever hear it, no offense, but if I look like Kurgan, I would probably, a towel would be probably the least of my problems. I'd start calling up plastic surgeons. So can you change my face? So he comes up and attacks Moose. A bit of a tangent there. Attacks Moose with the towel on his head, and we're going to be getting Moose versus EC3 at some point. So perhaps that's where this TNA World Heavyweight Championship storyline ends. Maybe EC3 is the one to defeat Moose for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. He tears down the false idol, the false prophet, and finally gets rid of the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. I would still like it to be unified. I think that'd be a really fun thing to do. I would like to see Moose challenge Eddie Edwards, winner take all, unify that championship. I think that's the best way to retire it, because look, Moose can't go around as the TNA World Heavyweight Champion forever. It was a fun thing. And it was meant to tie into the TNA There's No Place Like Home event back in April, but obviously that was cancelled due to the pandemic. And they still carried on with the storyline anyway on Impact Television, so that was fun. But he can't carry around the title forever, so you have to start considering how are they going to get rid of it, how are they going to write it out of television. And at the moment, the way that it looks like, I don't think it's going to be Heath, the one winning it next week. I think either EC3 is going to win it. He's a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion anyway. He used to hold that title anyway, not specifically that one, because that one's actually a knockoff made in Pakistan. The real one is, I don't know where it is, somewhere else. But I think eventually either EC3 wins it and says, this is a false idol, I don't live in the past, I don't do nostalgia, and just gets rid of it then. Or you can have Moose challenge Eddie Edwards. Moose is calling himself the real world champion, right? As the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, I am the real world champion. Let's find out who the real world champion is. You have an open challenge for the Impact World Championship, Eddie Edwards. I have an open challenge for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship in Moose. Why not we both put our open challenges together, we face each other, winner take all, and we find out who the real world champion truly is. I think that would be a fun way to do it. If I tried to read the tea leaves on this one, I don't think that is the way they're going to do it. I think EC3 will be the one to defeat Moose for the title, and then he'll get rid of it. I don't think it'll be Heath. Could be wrong, of course, but if I was in charge of Impact and if I was booking, I would maybe have the Eddie Edwards versus Moose match. I think that'd be a lot of fun and a fun way to end this whole TNA World Heavyweight Championship storyline. Because like I said, it can't last forever. Even though that championship with the white leather looks absolutely chef's kiss, as the kids would say. It looks brilliant. It looks absolutely fantastic. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Heath versus Moose next week on Impact Wrestling? Do you think Heath will win? Do you think Heath will be signed to the Impact Wrestling roster, or do you think he'll carry on this free agent storyline? What are your opinions on this free agent storyline? Is it good? Is it stupid? Should Heath be doing it? Is it 2016? Let me know your thoughts on all of that stuff in the comment section below. I'll be sure to reply and respond to all of your comments. I really do enjoy interacting with you guys. Anyone that takes the time to put a comment on this video, I do my very best to reply and respond to it. So I really appreciate everyone that takes the time to leave a comment on these videos. If you have enjoyed this video, please do give it a like as well. The likes really do help us out on this channel in terms of going up the rankings here on YouTube and getting into people's recommendation feeds. So if you have enjoyed this video, please do give us a like. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. We're very, very close to 600 subscribers now. At the time of recording, we're about 10 subscribers off 600 on that long run to 1,000 subscribers. Once we get to 1,000 subscribers, we will be doing a lot more streams, watch-alongs, going live a lot more often, reactions, all of that fun stuff, whether it is Monday Night Raw, NXT, AEW Dynamite, Impact Wrestling, Friday Night SmackDown, pay-per-views, all of that stuff we'll be doing live streams for. It's just a lot easier to do once we get to 1,000 subscribers. So the quicker we get there, we can do some really, really fun and engaging content on the channel that I'm really looking forward to doing. So the quicker we get to 1,000 subscribers, the quicker we can really start to have a lot of fun on this channel. Not that we don't anyway, of course. But if you have subscribed already, just know that I really do appreciate you subscribing. It's very, very humbling that anyone would take the time to listen to me talk about wrestling or just discuss wrestling. The aim for me on this channel is to have it like just a couple of friends talking about pro wrestling, right? That's the whole thing. It's about opinions, it's about chatting, and on this channel you'll never be criticized for your opinion, you'll never be chastised for sharing your opinion. It's just about coming here, it's a safe place, leaving your opinions, talking about pro wrestling with a friend, and just enjoying yourself and enjoying pro wrestling. So anyone that hasn't subscribed, just know that I really do appreciate it. You can also follow us on our social media platforms. The handles are on the screen right now. The links are in the description box below. It's at 365Wrestle on Twitter and at WrestleNews365 on Facebook and Instagram. So be sure to give us a follow or a like there if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak with you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.